Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another casting video I'm kind of redoing after 5 years, where technically a little bit less than 5 years ago, early 2020, I did end up doing a casting video of Survivor Old School versus New School, yet here, in the lead up to Survivor 50, I'm going to do a slight modification of that format, and here we're going to be talking about Survivor Old Era versus New Era, which is, again, a video that I'm bumping up on the schedule here. One, again, because the go on its actual anniversary, put it probably around the time we're going to be learning more about the 50 cast, where, again, I kind of wanted to separate it from that, but also, I did legitimately want to make this cast because I do think this is a somewhat plausible theme to be utilized from Survivor production, where Jeff Probst himself has talked about in future returning seasons that he wants to see these players from the old era of the show be tested in a new era format, and I do feel like the perfect way to do that would be something like Old Era versus New Era. To where, again, while I don't actually think Survivor 50 will have a genuine theme, I do think Old Era versus New Era is probably one of the more plausible ones, even though I do think an issue with that is, again, it forces them to have half the cast be from the old era, which is something that I don't know if they want to be strong-armed into doing so, but still, again, we will be running through Survivor history and creating a cast with one tribe containing players from the old era, again Survivors 1 through 40, while the other tribe contains players only from the new era, again Survivor 41 through 46. Now, again, this video is coming out in the middle of Survivor 47's airing, and straight up, I'm recording this video at the very beginning of Survivor 47's airing. So, again, while by now we probably do have a good sense of who would be brought back for 47, I'm just going to decide to leave 47 out of it. And to be fair, even with that, the new era tribe is still pretty stacked. So either way, I do think the way that we're going to run through this is obviously just chronologically, where obviously with this sort of theme, all the old era people are obviously going to be talked about first, and then we'll get to the new era at the end. And straight for the old era, I actually do think this is a much more difficult group to put together. I actually feel like the new era was very easy to put together. I feel like the way that production feels about a lot of these people is very fresh in our minds, to where, again, I feel like narrowing it down to 10, while, again, there were some difficult cuts along the way, I don't feel it was that difficult of a task. While I do think with the old era grouping here, I think it's a lot more difficult to determine who exactly production would bring back at this current point. And something I did end up doing for this list here is I did end up excluding any previously returning player. I mean, to me, I've said this in the past, I think my ideal for Survivor 50 would be that it would only contain players that have only played once in the past. Now, again, I don't really personally care if they're winners or not, where I know a lot of people want just a straight up second chance. Again, I would personally like some winners in that mix, so I do want to limit the people that have only played once before. So through that, again, it really did shake up this old era grouping in the sense that obviously a lot of the big names have come back already, to where I think that added a different dynamic to this tribe than what it could have been, where obviously I could have included many legends of the game, yet I just felt like that wasn't the approach that was the most interesting to take. So again, I am still keeping this to a semi-realistic cast. I feel like these are at least people that production would have on their radars to bring back, and people that have shown a level of interest in returning. With that, let's just start off running through seasons from beginning to end, talking about people who were in consideration but did not make the cut. And straight up, you're not going to see many true old schoolers on this list, which, again, kind of makes this entire notion of having old era versus new era very strange. But, again, as I said, a lot of people from the older seasons have come back since then, and even then, I do think production's still going to skew a bit more modern, even for an old era tribe, where I do think the majority of those people will come from seasons in the 30s, where, and that makes this list a bit strange in itself, but either way. So starting off with Borneo, I mean, before I limited the cast to only one-time players, I did very much consider Jervis. Jervis was someone that I did initially think could potentially make the cut, though he didn't make it on. Considered Jenna Lewis, similar thing, though to be fair, she was a bit further off from making the cut. I very much considered Greg, where, as we'll eventually talk about with a certain person, I do want there to be at least like one really old school representative, and I feel like Greg is probably the most likely person to be asked of them, to where, again, obviously someone from the original Borneo, someone that they've been wanting back for a while. They almost got him back in second chance, though he had work obligations, though did say yes initially, to where, again, I think there's a world where Greg is in the running for 50. And again, he was someone that I was very much considering here, though I ended up going with a certain other option. So I considered Gretchen, who, again, similar mold, though, again, not as a mind from a production standpoint, where we don't really know what they think of Gretchen in the modern day, but again, I did consider her. From Australian Outback, I did consider the big three. I considered Tina, who, before I limited it to non-winners, I did consider her greatly. I should mention also the fact no winners ended up making this old era tribe, considering obviously a lot of the ones that would come back have now come back in Winners at War and other appearances, to where Tina is someone that I think if I didn't have that limitation, she probably would have made the cut. Again, to have this, like, again, really old school representative, though, again, she didn't make it on. But beyond that, also considered Colby and Jerry, both of which very much consideration. Jerry was probably a bit closer to making the cut, though, again, once I narrowed it down to just people that played once in the past, obviously I ended up cutting all their chances of being on. From Survivor Africa, I did consider the likes of Lex, again, someone that is probably one of the most definitive old school players in my mind. When I think of like old school Survivor, I feel like Lex is actually one of those first people that I would expect to be on like an old school tribe. Yet again, a bit tough to fit him on this cast, even if I didn't put that extra ruling in. And beyond that, obviously I would consider T-Bird. I would have loved to see T-Bird on. I just don't know where production's necessarily at on her at this point. Kelly Goldsmith, another person, similar case. I think there's a shot Kelly Goldsmith could be in the running for 50. I really just don't genuinely know. Again, she was relatively close to making the cut here. Next up are Marquesas, and I mean, here I did consider someone like Vesepia, though again, obviously didn't put winners on by the end, and even then, I still don't actually fully know where production stands on her, so again, did not put her on. Also did not put on Boston Rob, who, similar thing, no winners, but even then, I don't think he would say yes anyway, but he would definitely get the call. I did actually put on one person, though, and again, this is pretty much the representative for old school Survivor on this list. This is the only person that made the cut pre-Micronesia, and that player is Sean Rector. And again, Sean Rector is someone that I would keep my eye on for potentially being on 50. Now, straight up, I don't fully know where they necessarily stand with Sean Rector, to where this is more so like a gut pick, I guess, in the sense that I do feel like Sean Rector at least stands somewhat of a chance of being cast nowadays. And we're looking for an old school representative, especially someone that, again, fits the new era casting style. I do feel like Sean kind of perfectly fits into that. And mixing down the fact that, again, he was very much involved in getting that diversity mandate through, which, again, was literally just a few years ago. I do feel like he would be, again, at least on their minds as someone to consider, and mixing out the fact that Sean himself has said that he didn't know if he would want to play Survivor again for a while, though if they did end up fixing a lot of the issues that stemmed from the lack of diversity in the show, he would consider it, to where, again, I think Sean is someone that I would at least expect to be in the running here. And again, I got to the point in this list where obviously a lot of post 30 people were making it on, to where at the end, I essentially just wanted one sole representative of old school Survivor, and I feel like Sean felt the most right to me of those. So again, he made it on my list here. Next up, Thailand. I mean, only person I somewhat considered was Sheehan, though again, not really. So again, no one really made the cut. Amazon. I mean, I very much considered Rob Cesternino. I mean, again, before I cut it down to only one-time players, Rob was on my initial draft of the list. Again, I think he is someone that would be cool to see in this old era sort of tribe, and obviously it'd just be interesting to see him play again, though again, at the end of the day, decided to cut him off. Next up, Pearl Islands. Again, obviously a lot of people to consider here, though obviously a lot of those people have played again. You got someone like Savage, who again, I've always found to be an underrated character, though I don't think he's particularly likely to be cast anymore. Rupert obviously is a big legend of the game, and I did consider him before taking out those legends of the game from this list, but again, he did not make it on. Fair Play is someone I consider, considering I do feel like Fair Play standing with production's a bit better than what it used to be, though still a bit unsure to where he didn't make it on. And also I did consider Sandra, as always, as again, I think if you pay her enough, I think she'll always say yes, but I just felt like she was kind of unnecessary for a cast like this. Next up for Vanuatu. I considered a few people, again, same people that have played again since then. Someone like Amy, who I think would be a really cool pick for a tribe like this. I would be very happy to see it, though I would not expect it, so I did not put her on. Eliza, similar thing. Would be interesting to see Eliza, who constantly criticizes the new era, have the play in the new era, though did not end up going with her. And the true contender for this list was Twyla, where, again, Twyla is someone that we know has been in the casting pool pretty often for returning seasons, and she hasn't played again, where again, I did consider her here, yet she did not make the cut. Next up for Palau. I mean, Ian is someone I very much considered here, someone that constantly gets asked back, constantly says no. I would just assume he would say no again here, though if he didn't, I think he would be someone that would be a bit close to making the list, though too fair, he probably still would not have made it on. Also have considered Stephanie LaGrossa, who again, before I narrowed it down to only one-time player, Stephanie LaGrossa was pretty much on my list the entire time, though by the end, I just felt like it was easier just to cut her off and replace her with someone a bit more recent. Next up for Guatemala, I mean, no one was really in consideration. I guess you could say I somewhat considered Danny, though not really that deeply. So again, no one made the cut there. Next for Panama, where I pretty much considered most of the top 4. I did consider Daniel De Lorenzo, who we know was in the running for Edge of Extinction. And I mean, maybe could have made the cut had I not limited the group, though realistically, probably not, though. Also considered Terry Dietz, who I think would have been an interesting pick here, though I just think it's kind of, again, a stacked field for the men's side of things, where he's never too close to making it on. Though he probably would have been a major consideration, specifically if someone from the new era made it on the cast. Also considered Cirie, who, again, is a bit of a question mark now that she's on AU versus the World, where I don't know if they would want her back for 50, though, again, she was definitely in consideration, though did not make it on. And I also consider Shane Powers, who is the only one of these that actually, like, fits the rulings I decided on by the end of it, but again, just someone that I don't know exactly if he would say yes or not. And again, his field's a bit tough anyway, to where, again, did not put him on. Next for Cook Islands, obviously considered, again, a lot of these other returning players. Yule is someone I considered here, though I feel like there's enough rockiness on whether or not he would come back, and again, there's just so many other options to where he did not make it on. Ozzy is someone I very much considered, and kind of in the Terry Dietz sort of mold. He probably would have been likely if I ended up keeping in someone from the new era, though I cut him, and then eventually made the rule of only one-time players, where by that point, Ozzy did not make it on. Now, again, gotta mention Parvati. Realistically, I don't think Parvati would say yes, but to fair, she said that in many interviews, though, again, that made me not think she would be on AU vs. the World, and she is, but even then, my rulings disqualified her from this anyway. Also considered Penner, and Penner's someone I would actually really like to see play again, and I think this would actually be a good spot for him. After all the other rules I made, he just did not fit on the cast. And also I did consider Candice Cody, again, another person I think actually would kind of fit into this kind of grouping here, like the caliber of players that we have here, though. Another one, again, by the end of it, did not fit within the rules I set. Next for Survivor, Fiji, and only one true consideration here, and that person's Earl Cole, and I really want to put Earl Cole on this cast. And straight up, he was on the cast for the majority of it. Like, he was literally one of the first people I locked in on the old era tribe, to where I thought he would be a lock on it. I did end up cutting him by the end, specifically because by the end of it, no other winners from the old era end up making it onto the final cast, to where while there are some in the new era, I feel like with the old era, it just felt strange to just have one winner on the tribe. So while he was in consideration for a pretty long time, I ended up cutting him by the end. Next up for China, I did consider Todd Herzog, who, again, just unsure where production stands on him at this point. I would love to see him back. And if he were a bit more in good standing with production, I would probably have him on the cast here. But though, because I'm a bit unsure, I end up leaving him off. Also, I considered Amanda Kimmel, who, again, don't know really where she stands in production. Don't really know much about her current stance on Survivor, to where I believe she said that she would be willing to play again a while ago. I haven't seen anything from her more recently, though, again, did not put her on here. Also, I considered James Clement, who, again, was none of these people that I considered simply because of a certain other person from New Era that didn't make it on, to where when that person didn't make it on, James didn't make it on. So, again, he did not make it on the cast. Next up, moving on to Micronesia, and there's only one true consideration for Micronesia, and they made it on. The only other person pre-30 to make it on this cast, and that person is Natalie Bolton. And again, I think Natalie Bolton, I've said this for a while, is someone that I would love to see back from this era of the show. I do think Natalie is someone that has been in the running for years at this point. Again, we know she was in the running for Second Chance. We know that she was literally an on-site alternate for Here's Villains, to where, again, we know she's in the running. She has popped up a bit more in the modern day. So again, when we're specifically narrowing this down to an old era tribe, to where while I do think, again, a lot of it will be more recent, I think someone like Natalie Bolton can squeak onto the cast there. So again, I decided to pick her in this spot. Except for Gabon, and no one really from Gabon is in true consideration. I considered Kenny, though even then I don't think Kenny's really that close to making it on. So again, no one made it on from Gabon. Next for Tocantins, and Tocantins was a tough one here. I really wanted to put Coach on, though again, when narrowing down the cast and deciding on no previous returnees, obviously he did not make it on, though he's someone that I did have in my head was going to make it on when I first concepted this idea. And also I consider Tyson, though again, Tyson's a bit wonky on whether or not he would play again, and obviously at the end of the day, he didn't fit after all the rules anyway. Next up for Samoa, I mean, straight up, I did not even consider a single person from Samoa. I don't feel like anyone there is particularly likely outside of someone like Shambo, though again, Shambo doesn't want to play again, so again, no one was in consideration. Next for Nicaragua, and kind of a similar spot. Only true consideration here was Marty, though I do worry that, again, it's been a bit too long. I don't know if he's that high on production's radars anymore. And while, again, I personally would probably have him on my dream cast in this spot, he did not make it on here. Next up for Redemption Island, and here, the main considerations here were some of the younger women on the board, and something that this cast does kind of struggle with, particularly on the old era side of things, is having people on the younger side of things, with this obviously being a group of players from older seasons, to where, again, I considered the likes of a Natalie Tenorelli, a Ashley Underwood, an Andrea Belki, a Stephanie Valencia. Again, these younger women, for a while I believe many of them are in their mid to late 30s, which still, again, a decent chunk older than even the younger people you see on typical All-Star seasons. I feel like just none of them were that likely to be cast in this spot, so again, I did not put them on. Next up for South Pacific, and here I did very much consider Sophie before I cut out winners. I did feel like Sophie was someone that obviously had a good run in Winners at War. I wouldn't mind seeing her back to see her be tested once again, though at the end of the day, I just did not feel like she fit the cast. And also, I did consider someone like a Jim Rice, who, another person like Marty, I always wanted to see back, though I think his time's probably past at this point. Next up for One World, and not many considerations here. I mean, the true considerations were, again, the likes of Sabrina and Chelsea, which I talk about constantly. So again, they've been constantly called for previous seasons. Now I believe Sabrina's kind of out on the concept of playing Survivor again. So again, I wasn't going to put her on here, and someone like Chelsea is someone that is not necessarily that high on my personal board. So again, neither of them made the cut. Next up for Philippines, and here a big consideration here was Malcolm, and Malcolm is another one very close to making the cut, though by the end of it, again, narrowed down the field to just one-time players to where he wasn't eligible, and even then, I just felt like there was probably another person that kind of fit this overall tribe a bit better than him anyway, to where, again, he didn't make it on, and beyond that, I did also consider someone like an RC, who I know is someone that Jeff does like, and again, considering the limitations around this cast, I think she was actually like relatively close to making it on here, though, again, she did not by the end. Next up for Cara Moen. Literally didn't consider a single person for Cara Moen. Next up for Blood vs. Water. And here, again, considered people like Sierra, obviously someone that Jeff Probst loves, particularly at the time. Haven't really heard him talk about her that much recently, though. Again, she's definitely someone that would have been in the running here, though did not make it on by the end. I also considered Hayden, though I believe Hayden has said that he doesn't have much interest in coming back to Survivor, to where, again, he did not make it on. Also, I did consider Brad Culpepper, who is someone that I wouldn't mind seeing a return of Brad Culpepper, but again, I feel like, considering how strong the field is here, he wasn't someone that I felt like was a necessity, so again, he did not make it on. Next up for Cagayan, and I mean, a lot of people could be considered here. Obviously, you got Tony. I'm not going to put Tony on this cast. I feel like it's kind of a waste. Also, obviously, he just was on A vs. the World, where who knows if they would even bring him back anyway. So, again, did not put him on here. Also considered Cass, who I know a lot of people do very much want back. And again, I wouldn't be opposed to it either. I just feel like, again, with a cast like this, I do feel like it was just easier to just go only one-time players. So, again, she did not make it on. Also considered Tasha, who's something I actually did deeply consider. For a while, I'm not like dying for a Tasha return. I do feel like Tasha kind of fits the bill for what you're kind of looking for in this sort of cast. Though, again, she did not make it on by the end. Also, I did consider Alexis Maxwell, because I tried to get a younger woman on the cast, and even then she didn't make the cut. Also, I considered J'Tia, who was a bit closer to making the cut. I think it'd actually be really interesting to see J'Tia back, and I feel like a field like this might be one of the better chances to get her back. Yeah, even then, did not make the cut. And the same thing goes with Bryce, who is someone that, again, I also would like to see back. I do feel like he's someone that was a really fun character. Obviously has had a lot of lasting power outside the show and his podcasting career, to where, again, I think he's a lot of fun, but again, he didn't make the cut. Next up for San Juan del Sur, and I did very much consider Natalie Anderson, to where before the rule of no previous returning players, Natalie Anderson was actually on my list initially, and it was when she was cut that I ended up cutting Earl alongside her, but I just feel like Natalie's probably too big of a name for this specific grouping, which by the end of it obviously doesn't contain any like real legends of the game, to where I feel like Natalie probably had too big of a target on her back for a cast like this, so I did give her some merits of her making the cut, especially as she does add physical strength to the tribe. Now, also consider Jeremy, who, again, I don't think would say yes. I think Jeremy's kind of out on playing Survivor again, and even if he did, he would not qualify here anyway. Also consider Kelly Wentworth, and Kelly Wentworth is another one very close to making the cut here. I actually had Kelly Wentworth and Natalie Anderson on my list initially, as I think it would be interesting to see those two play again together, considering we never got to see that fully play out in San Juan del Sur, though by the end of it, again, I just feel like there's so many options here to where I think it's just better off to leave it on just one-time players. Next up are Worlds Apart, and I mean, I did kind of consider Mike. Now, I believe the rumors that he has had a falling out with production, to where I don't know how likely he is to be brought back, though again, I would personally like to see him back, though did not make a cut. The major consideration for him this season, though, was Carolyn, where Carolyn was someone that at the time of Game Changers, Jeff Probst literally said that next time we have a returnee season, you're going to be on it. And again, I sadly don't think that's really necessarily the case at this point, to where, well, you can very much tell how much she wants it. I really don't know if she's particularly high on their boards anymore, to where for me, it was a debate between her and a certain other person that we will talk about relatively soon. And I could see a world where they go with Carolyn, especially considering the diversity mandate of it all. But considering I wasn't particularly struggling with this cast from a diversity standpoint, the other person's a bit more recent, I did end up going the other person over Carolyn here. Next up for Kaoh Rong, and we finally have another person to make the cut here. Though, again, people I considered, but that did not make it on. Michelle Fitzgerald, obviously, someone that I think could be in the running still in the modern day. I think she's someone that production was much higher on after Winners at War. Yeah, again, I did not put her on. Same thing goes with Aubrey, who I believe has said more recently that she would be willing to play again, though I don't really get this sense that she's like dying to play again, to where, again, I did not put her on because of that. Tai Trang is another person I really wanted to put on, especially considering his cast is a bit lacking in terms of Asian representation, to where obviously he would have been a good fit because of that. And even beyond that, I think he's someone that would still be willing to play again. I could see production still considering him for the return. Yet sadly, I did not put him on. But the person I did put on here is a person that I'm a little bit unsure on whether or not they would come back straight up. I do think they're kind of in that Sean Rector sort of mold, where last we've heard from them, they've been a bit hesitant, though this was kind of for different reasons. But either way, that person is Sydney. And again, I said screw it. I'm going to put Sydney on. Now, Sydney has talked in the past about how she wouldn't come back in the near future because of her bodybuilding career and how much the island took the toll on her, though again, it's a shorter season, and we know production wanted her back, where she did get calls for future seasons, to where, again, I would just assume that she would be a little bit more willing to play nowadays, and again, I would personally love to see it back, so screw it, I put her on my cast here. Next up for Millennials vs. Gen X, where I did put another person on the cast from this cast here. I did consider people like David, who, again, seems to be willing to play again. It's not someone I'm like dying to see play again either, so again, I did not put him on. Also, I did consider some earlier boots from the season, like Michaela. I think Michaela's obviously made a big name for herself on the challenge, and even then has a really iconic exit from this season. I could definitely see a world where they do bring her back, though I did not put her on. But the person I did put on here ends up being Jay. Again, I was a bit unsure whether or not Jay would make the cut here. Jay was pretty much the last guy that I really locked into this cast, where really a major reason why Jay ends up being on the cast here is because I limited it to no previous returnees, where I believe actually Malcolm was on the cast over him at a point. But even then, Jay's someone that I would like to see back on Survivor. Obviously, he had a really interesting run on Survivor, and they very much liked him at the time. Now, obviously, since then, he's been on the challenge, where his reception's been a little bit more rocky, but I still think I'm willing to see Jay on the Survivor again. I think it could still play on an interesting way, and I think there is some at least game ability there, to where I think it'll at least be an interesting return, so again, I put him on. Next up from HHH, and again, I put a person from HHH on the cast. Now, again, a few considerations. Obviously, Ben is someone that they're going to want back. I'm sure they're going to call Ben. Yeah, I don't know if Ben's going to say yes, and even then, I don't want Ben on my cast, so I did not put him on. Also did not put on Devin Pinto, though again, he would have been fighting for that spot with Jay, and I feel like Jay's a much more likely returnee than Devin, so again, Devin did not make my cut. And I did consider Ali Elliott, who is this pre-merge boot that Jeff seemed to like at the time, and again, seemed to be someone that a lot of people were clamoring for a second chance, though at this point, again, I think it might be a bit too far gone. The person I did put on from this season, again, kind of alluded to it earlier, it is Chrissy, and again, as I said, I think Chrissy's kind of fighting for a spot with Carolyn. I think they're in a similar archetype, they're both runners up, they have good returnee storylines. I don't really have a big preference on which one of the two comes back necessarily, to where I feel like Carolyn's made more of my cast, though, simply because of, again, diversity mandate and her helping out with that. Though again, in this spot here, again, the cast is still probably diverse without Carolyn, and Chrissy is someone that is a bit more recent. So again, I am going Chrissy in this spot. Next up for Ghost Island, and again, a few considerations. You got someone like Wendell, who I think is still probably in the casting pool. I would assume they're going to ask him, though I don't know if he's a top priority to be brought back in this spot. I'd also consider Donathan, where I do think Donathan is someone that Jeff very much liked at the time. Yeah, another person that I don't know if I necessarily want him back, so again, did not put him on. Also did not put on Kellen, to where I think I have put on Kellen in some of my previous casts, and to be fair, I did consider her even for this spot, though I think as time goes on, there's a lot more people in a similar archetype to her, to where I don't know how top of mind she's necessarily going to be nowadays. Also considered Michael Yerger, who, again, similar thing. I think he kind of fits in this archetype that we kind of get a lot of over time, to where I kind of doubt that he's still top of mind for them, though again, you never know, but again, did not put him on my list. Person I did put on here, obviously, is Dominic. Again, I think Dominic's one of the bigger potential returnees from this time, to where while I do worry for Dominic's spot on the actual proper 50, I feel like for me personally, I would very much put Dominic on my cast. I feel like he's someone that has this fantastic storyline for a return to where, and also makes me out of the fact that he is obviously this very aggressive player and someone that I think perfectly fits in line with the type of players you see in the new era. I feel like he's, again, a perfect pick from my point of view. Next up for David vs. Goliath. And David vs. Goliath ends up being the only old era cast. I put more than one person from the cast on the cast, and I actually put 3 people on the cast from this cast, which might be a little bit overboard, but I do think David vs. Goliath is still pretty top of mind for them, especially out of the old era seasons. I think it is probably the cast that they're most likely to draw from. So again, people that I consider that did not make it on, I did consider Mike White. And Mike White is someone that I thought for a while would not be willing to play again, though it does seem like he might actually be. I think it probably more so come down to whether or not he's available, obviously considering he has other things going on. But considering like Jeff's constant talk about Mike White nowadays in more recent interviews, I actually feel like there's a shot Mike White makes the cut, though I did not put him on here. I did very much consider Davey, and Davey's this person that I would love to see on 50. Obviously, he always gets kind of screwed over in these casting processes, always being alternates, and sadly here again, he did not make my cut, even though I very much considered him for quite a bit. I did consider Natalie Cole, who I would love to see back. Obviously, that would be really interesting to see. I don't know how top of mind she is for production, though obviously would be a great pick, though again, did not make it on. Though the people that did make it on here. Now, first 2, pretty big locks. First up, we got Angelina. Again, I think if we're limiting the pool to just old era, I think there's almost no real way that Angelina doesn't make it on. I'll be very surprised. I feel like Angelina was someone that Jeff was so high on at the time of David vs. Goliath, saying that she was the person that he would the most want to see back for future season, to where obviously she was an incredible character and someone that, again, I just think very easily makes the cut here. Same thing goes to Christian, where, again, I think as time goes on, I think Christian probably has a lot more staying power than Angelina in Jeff Probst's mind. I feel like we get a lot more mentions of Christian in the modern day, to where, again, I would be shocked that Christian's not on 50. I feel like he should be a pretty big lock, and I feel like for a cast like this, again, having more old era than what most casts probably will have, again, pretty easy person to put on the board. Next person, again, was a bit tougher. This was the last woman I put on the cast here. And again, this is a person I cast, again, essentially because I wanted to put another, like, younger woman on the board. Those persons, even themselves, I believe, in their early 30s. But still, I put Gabby Pascuzzi on. Sure, again, I think Gabby is still definitely on their radars. I would not be shocked that Gabby gets the call for 50. Now, again, I think, does she make it on the cast? A little bit of a question mark. But again, I think she'll at least be in the running. And I think there are some interesting prospects here. Again, her being back on the show with Christian would be interesting. Even though, again, I think they definitely will work together initially. Though, again, I still think it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. And beyond that, again, I think she's a very different archetype of the women on the old era tribe, to where, while you can debate her being in a similar-ish archetype to people in the new era, I do feel like from the old era point of view, I feel like she's a bit more unique here, to where, again, I think Gabby is someone that I would personally like to see back anyway. So again, she made the cut here. Next up, Edge of Extinction, and obviously got one big lock on the board, though outside that, I consider Chris. Again, Chris is actually one I would actually be really interested in seeing back, and I think production themselves are seemingly high on Chris, with Jeff praising him whenever he talks about him, though, again, at the end of the day, did not make the cut here. They consider someone like Victoria, who I would personally like to see back, though I don't know how high on production's radar she is. I did consider Ron Clark, another person I would very much like to see back, though I think he's kind of a bit overshadowed nowadays, and I did consider Reem, who I know is someone that Jeff does still talk about nowadays, where I would actually not be that shocked if Reem is still in the running for a modern returnee season. Yeah, I don't think she makes the cut by the end of it. The person that does make the cut is obviously Rick Devens. And again, Rick Devens is a lock for 50. I just think there's no possible way he's not on, unless he has something in his real life to stop him. Again, I think Rick Devens is very apt to play again. Production adores him. I just think there's no way that he would not be someone that they very much wants, to where, again, I think he's a lock on the board here. Next for IOI, and again, no one from IOI made it. We already talked through the entire old era tribe here, though, again, people I consider likes it Nora, who, again, I think is probably overshadowed by this point. Lauren Ashley Beck is someone that I think Jeff liked at the time. Don't know if she makes the cut anymore. Considered Janet, though, again, Janet's wonky, specifically because of the Dan Spilo situation, to where I don't know if they would want to risk the chance of that bringing that back up. Also, not put on Elaine. Elaine was probably the closest, though, to making it on here. I feel like Elaine is someone that Jeff very much liked at the time. I considered her putting on the final cut here, though I didn't end up putting her on, and I did consider Karishma, who I would personally like to see back, though I don't know how high production necessarily is on her, to where, again, she did not make the cut there. And with that, we're finally on to the new era, where, again, obviously we got 10 people from the new era from just these 6 seasons, and again, this was pretty easy to narrow down straight up. I feel like this is a group of people that, again, all the people I put on here I think are very likely to be on 50. These are all people that are very high on production's radars and would probably easily make the cut. But again, we'll still run through in chronological order, starting off with Survivor 41. No one from Survivor 41 made the cut. And I've said this in the past, I do think 41 is probably going to struggle with making it onto 50. I feel like 41 is a season that is kind of overshadowed nowadays. I don't feel like it's particularly top of mind for them. And I don't think it's a season they particularly love in retrospect, to where, again, there definitely are contenders here for sure. I mean, you got Xander, who obviously was a big fan favorite at the time. I just think there's other options at this point that fulfill similar-ish archetypes. So again, he did not make it on. I considered Ricard, who, again, had this been immediately after 41, I think he would be a bit more consideration. Yeah, I think as time goes on, he's probably a bit forgotten about from a production point of view. Also not put on Shan, and obviously Shan's this big name a lot of people would like to see back. I would personally like to see Shan back. Yeah, I do think Shan's in a spot where, again, I don't know how production necessarily feels about her. Again, there's obviously all these rumors that she did not leave the greatest taste in their mouths postseason. So again, I don't know if they would ask her back. And again, considering how competitive the field is to begin with, again, she did not make it on. Also considered Evie, and Evie's someone that I do think would be a bit more on their radars. I would very much expect Evie to be in the casting process for 50. I just don't know if they're going to be someone that makes the ultimate cut by the end. So again, they didn't make it on for me. But now moving on to 42, and shockingly, I only put one person for 42 on. Initially, there was going to be more, but anyway, contenders here. Mike is someone I considered. Again, I think Mike's kind of in the spot where I would definitely expect him to be in the running for 50. I don't know if he makes the ultimate cut. And again, he did not make the cut for me by the end of it here. Person I did almost put in the cast here is Jonathan. And again, Jonathan's in the spot here where he's actually harmed from the fact that this is an old era versus new era group, where, again, I do expect Jonathan to very much be in the running for 50. I would actually be pretty surprised if he doesn't make it on. Yet, I do feel like for a cast like this, I think Jonathan might be a bit overpowered. So, again, when trying to balance out the tribes in terms of strength and challenges, I just feel like Jonathan just feels too good in comparison to this group. I mean, looking at the men of the old era side of things, you got, again, Sean Rector, who, again, is a bit older at this point. Dominic's also, again, a bit older. Again, both of them, again, competent competitors. Again, definitely on the older side of things. You got Jay, who's fine, but definitely not this, like, massive beast that Jonathan is. Rick Devens, again, is also, again, a probably understated competitor, but again, definitely no Jonathan. And then you got Christian. So it's like, again, I don't feel like there's anyone there to really stand up to Jonathan, to where I think he's a bit overpowered in this spot, to where, again, I did consider putting someone like Ozzy on the opposite tribe to kind of be that person, or, again, someone like James, though even then, James is kind of on the older side of things now, to where, again, I did consider trying to find this, like, really physical presence for the old school tribe to put Jonathan on here. Yeah, I didn't really feel like anyone really fit, and I feel like because of that, Jonathan just did not really fit this tribe. So again, I did not put him on. But beyond that, I did also consider Omer, where, again, I would love to see Omer back. Again, Omer would definitely make my dream cast. Yeah, I don't know where he stands with production, where obviously the entire situation with Drea is something that I don't think production was particularly happy about. I really don't hear Jeff ever talk about Omer in the modern day, to where I would not be shocked if Omer is someone that might actually get skipped over for 50, sadly. And with that, also consider Drea. And again, for a while, I was looking at Drea as someone that was a lock to be on 50, as again, production has very much praised her over time. Yet, again, I kind of lean towards maybe she wouldn't make it on nowadays, just because there's the potential of her controversy being sprung up again, where, while they could try to hide it like they did last time, I feel like kind of lean towards them just not bothering to cast her in this spot. The person I did put on for Survivor 42 ends up being Marianne, because obviously, again, I think Marianne's one of the biggest locks on the board. She has said that she would be willing to play again. And again, production adores her. I don't think there's really any real shot that she doesn't make it on outside of, again, something happening in her real life. But again, I think she's very likely to be on. So again, easy pick there. Next up for 43. And again, two people from 43 made the final cut. People that I considered. I did consider Gabler. And again, Gabler is someone that I would have said there's no shot Gabler being on 50 until a bit more recently, where I do feel like Gabler gets some mentions here and there. Again, we literally saw him get mentioned in 46, to where, again, I think Gabler maybe have a shot. But again, I'm not going to put him on this cast, though. Also, I did consider Cassidy, though. Again, I think at the end of the day, I'm not looking at Cassidy as the most likely returnee. I don't know if production's necessarily that high on her in the grand scheme of things. So again, she did not make it on. Also considered Owen, and I feel like Owen's kind of in this spot where he's probably bordering on the list. So again, I kind of question how high production necessarily is on Owen. I feel like he probably was their favorite of the people that made the final three, though we know they were disappointed with the final three. Where I don't know where they stand on him, and at the end of the day, I just didn't put him on. Also considered Cody, where Cody was a big one, where I think at the time he would have been this big lock. Yeah, I think over time, again, there's just so many other people in this archetype that I think he kind of gets overshadowed. I think the only real chance of him being brought back is, again, his rivalry with another person. Yeah, I think considering just how many options there are from the new era, I don't think that's quite enough to make him on, to make it onto this list. Also, I did consider Noelle, who, again, I think is another person I think is on their radars, and especially considering her recent appearance at the Paralympics. Again, I think she's probably a bit more in their radars, though at the end of the day, I don't think Noelle quite cracks this list here. So I would not be that shocked that she's definitely in consideration. But the people I did put on here, again, first up, we do got Jesse. And again, Jesse's a decently big lock on the board. I mean, I will say I don't think he's as big of a lock as some people might think, though I do think he is very likely on, especially at this current point in Survivor. Now, again, we still got 3 more seasons to go. We'll see if Jesse still makes the cut by then, but I think as of right now, I think Jesse's very, very likely. I think he makes the cut. And the other person's Carla. And Carla is someone that production very much loved at the time. Jeff adored her. With her, again, kind of being like the Drea of her season. To her, again, because she doesn't have a controversy surrounding her as big as Drea is. I feel like Carla is very likely on this cast. Again, I did leave her on here. Next, number 44. And 44 is a weird season where, again, production very much loved 44. To where, again, I would not be that shocked that we do get more 44 people on the cast than I'm expecting, but I just don't know who they're going to pick. So, again, people I considered, Heidi is someone that I know they were high on. I don't know why, though. Because again, she didn't even get that much screen time, but again, I didn't put her on. I did consider Carson, and again, straight up, he's the only one of the Tika 3 that did not make it the cut. But again, I think having all 3 of the Tika 3 on one singular tribe is a bit overboard, to where mixing out the fact that obviously, like, just archetype-wise, there's a lot of people, like, in a similar-ish mold to him. I just felt like it was better off just to leave him off. Also consider Lauren Harp, where I think Lauren Harp is this dark horse to potentially be on 50. I think she's someone that production very much likes. So again, I think she's definitely in the running, though did not make it on for me. Also consider Danny. I know Danny is someone that, again, they very much liked at the time. Kind of feels like the type of modern villain that they do enjoy. Again, did not fit the cast for me. Also consider Franny, and I feel like Franny is someone that, again, could very much likely be on 50. I think they did very much like Franny. Yeah, I could not squeeze her onto this list. But the people I did put on, I put on Jam Jam. Now, Jam Jam actually was the last guy to be locked in on my cast here, as I did initially consider not putting him on, though. I do feel like Jam Jam is someone that I very much expect to be on 50. I think production very much loves Jam Jam. I would be personally surprised if he did not make it on. Though again, whether or not he made this cast for me was kind of based around whether or not Jonathan made it on, where, again, Jam Jam was kind of like bordering on the list. Though I think it's better off that he did make the cut here. I think he obviously adds more diversity to the cast, both in terms of being Puerto Rican, but then also adding more LGBT representation. So again, I think in retrospect, he actually ends up being kind of a perfect pick for this list here. But obviously the other person, one of the bigger locks on the board, we got Carolyn. Again, I just don't see a world where Carolyn isn't on unless she just for some reason says no, which I'm not really expecting. I very much expect Carolyn to be on. Again, I think this was kind of a no-brainer. Next up for 45, and 45 is a bit of a tough cast here, as I do think there's a lot of potential people to come back from 45. Yeah, again, you can't have too many on this list here. So again, I did put 3 people on. Now, again, people that did not make the cut. Austin didn't make the cut. I think Austin's someone that I would very much expect to be in the running. I don't know if he actually makes it on the final cast itself, and obviously he is dating Jeff Probst's niece nowadays. So again, I don't really know where that necessarily puts him in terms of production. So again, I don't really feel like it's enough to not put him on, but even then, I think he's kind of hovering on the edge anyway, to where, again, I am not putting him on this list. Also consider Jake, where, again, Jake's this big underdog, fan favorite from the season. I just don't know where production necessarily stands with him. I feel like Jeff, again, definitely liked him by the end, though you can tell he was kind of annoyed with Jake across the season at points, to where, again, just decided to leave him off, considering how strong the field is here to begin with. Also considered Katurah, where I think Katurah is another person I think Jeff very much liked at the time. I could very much see her being on the list here, though, again, considering we only have 3 slots here, I feel like there's 3 other people he's more blatantly loved over time, to where, while I think Katurah, again, is definitely someone that could be on 50, did not make the cut here. Drew is someone that would be very high on their radars. I would be pretty shocked if he's not at least in deep consideration for something like Survivor 50, though I do feel like for this cast here, I feel like it's a bit tough to squeeze him on the list. To where, for me, it was kind of a debate between him and a certain person we'll talk about in a bit, where I think that person's a bit more of a lock, and another person that kind of sprang up as a lock more recently. So again, Drew ended up being kind of left out of it by the end of it. Although you consider Emily, and Emily's in the spot where, again, if she wants it, she's on. I just don't think she wants it, so I don't think she'll be on 50. So again, I did not put her on this. Also for an early boot, I did consider Sabaya, where of the early boots from the new era, I think it's probably one of the more likely ones to make it on 50. Yeah, even in this spot, I just feel like it's a bit tougher to squeeze on, to where, again, did not put her on. But the people that did make it on, first up, we do have Dee, the winner of the season, obviously. And again, I think Dee is someone that, if you asked me immediately after the season, I did not think she would be a lock. However, since then, obviously, she has hosted the On Fire podcast. Jeff Probst was very complimentary of her there, to where, again, I feel like he was a little bit coming off as a little bit unimpressed during the airing of 50, where I remember this moment on the On Fire podcast where Rick Devin said that Dee is the best winner of the new era, and Jeff was like a little bit surprised by that, to where, again, I think there was some rockiness there, though I think where we currently are, I think she's very likely likely. And I think archetype-wise, she's very different from a lot of the other women that would be in consideration for this New Era tribe. Where again, I think Dee is someone that very likely makes it on. Also, I did put on Kelly. Now, Kelly is someone that I talked about in the past. I feel like Kelly is someone that seems to be very high on production's radars. They seem to really love her. They loved her so much that they flew her out at the last second to be an alternate for Survivor 44, even after the cast was finalized, where after that, she was again automatically on 45. And post-show, again, they really hype up how important she is to season 45, talking about her vote off as like the climax of the season. And Jeff Probst reposted that her Blind Side was the best episode in the New Era, to where again, I do think they're very high on Kelly. And I know a lot of other people are very high on Kelly. Again, I don't personally see it. I feel like there are a decent chunk of other people that I would personally like to see back a bit more. Yeah, again, I do think Kelly is very likely to be on 50, and I feel like for a cast like this, again, she probably just easily makes it on. And the final person, again, I think also one of the bigger locks on the board from the New Era, we got Caleb. And I mean, to be fair, Caleb's not like automatically on Survivor 50, though I think he's very likely. I think they very much love Caleb at the time. Jeff Probst really hyped up Caleb on the On Fire podcast, talked about how great of casting he is, considering that and him having this like underdog arc his original time. I just feel like it'll be very surprising to me if Caleb doesn't make it on a cast like this. So again, he easily made it on. And finally, for Survivor 46, and we got a couple people making it on the cast here. Now, people I considered that did not make it on. I did consider Liz, who I would personally like to see back. I think it would be really humorous to see how that necessarily goes. Yeah, again, I feel like Liz is the type of person that, while I do think production likes her, I don't really get the sense that she's someone that they're dying to bring back again, where again, I did not pick her. I did not pick Maria, where Maria is someone that I think would be really interesting to see back, especially in conjunction with a certain other player. Yeah, I just think considering how limited slots are here, I feel like it was a bit tough to fit her onto this cast. Also would love to see Venus on. Now, I'm not expecting it, where I think Venus is one of these players that obviously has a pretty big fan base. Yeah, I don't really get a sense that production loves her, to where again, I think a lot of people are like kind of assuming that she's very likely to be on 50. Yeah, I don't actually think she is. So again, did not put her on. Also consider Tiffany, and Tiffany was relatively close to making it on. Again, if someone was fighting for that D spot, I feel like it probably would have been Tiffany. And I feel like it actually would have been interesting to see Tiffany on there with a certain other person that does make the final cast. Yeah, at the end of the day, again, I did pick D over her. I also considered Hunter, who again, I think they very much liked as well. Yeah, again, I think just archetype wise, it's very tough to fit him onto this list. Also, I did consider Tevin, and Tevin's in this weird spot here, where straight up, this is the first casting video I am recording after the announcement of who got picked to co-host the On Fire podcast for Survivor 47. And with Tevin not being picked in that spot, I think it's probably a bit of a blow towards Tevin's returning chances, especially considering how competitive the field is, where while Jeff Probst adores Tevin, talks about how if he could, he would have a Tevin on every season. I do feel, again, just looking at the field, it's a bit tough to squeeze Tevin on here. So I guess you could say you can swap him out for someone like Caleb, or again, the other person we'll be talking about, but we literally saw a situation where they picked the other person over him. Where, again, I just think at this point, while I do very much expect Tevin to be in the running, I don't know if he actually makes the final cut, but again, someone I definitely considered. But with that, again, the final people to be on the cast here, we got two people from Survivor 46. First of which being the person I was just referring to, we got Charlie. And again, as this is the first casting video I'm recording after the announcement of Charlie being co-host on Fire Podcast, I do think that makes him a pretty big lock for 50 at this point. I think Charlie is someone that, again, I was very much on the edge of if he would be on 50 or not. I feel like he was someone that I thought would probably be on at the time of 46, yet may have been kicked off over the next few seasons. I think at the point that we're at now, I would very much expect him to be on 50. Again, Jeff is very complimentary on the podcast. Talked about him being such a fan favorite. And again, I would expect him to be on 50 at this point. I do feel like he is kind of going to take that spot on the cast of being in that like kind of like Spencer mold of the modern game body fan favorite figure, to where again, I do think Charlie at this point is a pretty big lock on the board from my point of view. So again, he made the cut here. And the other person, obviously we got Q. Again, Q, I just think is such a unique character for the show, to where Jeff was also super complimentary of him on the On Fire podcast, to where I would be very shocked if Q does not make the cut, with him just being, again, such a electric personality and one that seems to be high on production's radar. So again, he made it on. But with that, that is my cast of Survivor, Old Era versus New Era. From the Old Era, I do have Sean Rector from Survivor Marquesas, Natalie Bolton from Survivor Micronesia, Sydney Gillen from Survivor Co. Wrong, Jay Starrett from Survivor Millennials vs. Gen X. We have Chrissy Hoffbeck from Survivor HHH, Dominic Abate from Survivor Ghost Island, Angelina Keeley, Christian Hubicki, and Gabby Patscusi from Survivor David vs. Goliath, and we have Rick Devens from Survivor Edge of Extinction. On the New Era Tribe from Survivor 42, we have Marianne Oketch. From Survivor 43, we have Jesse Lopez and Carla Cruz Godoy. From Survivor 44, we have Jam Jam and Carolyn Weiger. From Survivor 45, we do have Dee Valderez, Kelly Nalbandian, and Caleb Geberald. And from Survivor 46, we have Charlie Davis and Q Burdett. So with that is my cast of Survivor Old Era versus New Era. Now, I believe this is my last casting video for the year, at least of those that are pertaining to Survivor 50. Now, I still do want to do a dream casting video. Originally, that was going to be this year. I think I'll probably have to wait until sometime early next year. So again, stay tuned for that, along with my big cast speculation video I'm going to be doing towards the beginning of next year, where I'll be running through all of Survivor history, talking about pretty much everybody I think has a possible chance of being on Survivor 50 and talking through their returning chances. Beyond that, obviously, again, we are in the middle of Survivor 47. I'll obviously do a big review and player ranking at the end of the season, as always. And beyond that, just expect the typical solid content from the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.